Hi, everybody, and welcome back to our program, Applying the 7 Steps of Data Analysis to Produce a Quantitative Research Study. William Bannon of Stats Whisperer here. All right, we're pretty far along now along our 7 Steps of Data Analysis. In fact, this week we are at Step 7, the Write-Up and Report. So here, we're going to report the statistical analysis and results in the proper professional format, whether it's APA, American Psychological Association, or AMA, the American Medical Association format. Each of those are different. We'll focus on APA here, but AMA format is easily accessible too through their materials. We're going to look at the scientific language needed to report the results in text. Now, the scientific language, especially when stating statistical analysis, preparation, and results, is pretty particular. So we're going to describe it, and again, the sentences provided are meant to be used as templates. So you could plug in your variables and describe your findings likewise. We are also going to focus upon reporting the results and formatting the results in tables, right? Again, which are templates for you to report your findings. So essentially, we're going to report our findings here in tables and text, and the way we do it is supposed to act like a template for you to plug in your numbers and words. All right, there we are. At the bottom, right, step 7, write up and report. You are here. Congratulations. Now, in our parallel between our data analysis and data analysis, in data analysis for the bachelorette, step 7 would probably be the grand finale show, right? That last show, or maybe even one of those update shows that describes who was chosen, or who the couple is, their thoughts and feelings, and so on. So it's a report of everything that happened and the outcome, right? Now, don't forget the dependent variable in data analysis is also called the outcome variable. So in data analysis, they are too reporting the outcome. They're reporting the process, describing what happened during the process, right? They might say, oh, I felt this way on this show and that way on another show, right? That's the process. And then the outcome, but I'm happy, this is the way it turned out, and these are the results. Now, in data analysis, it's similar, just a little more scientific, right? So step 7, write up and report. We're preparing either probably a research report or a manuscript for a peer-reviewed journal that describes the process of our study, right, as well as the results, right, the discussion, conclusions, and so on. Okay, so specifically, we are going to describe the results in data analysis, that is, in tables and text, right? So many formats, right? Many formats to follow, as we said, right? So we're going to review the body of the entire paper using study 1 as the sample manuscript. Again, because sample study 1 had the more complex data analysis because of all the test assumptions. So in the textbook, right, it presents a paper for sample study 1 and sample study 2, right? So there's plenty to follow along with, right? But we'll use the more complex sample study 1 here as an example. Right? Also, we're going to focus here on statistical analysis, right? So again, the textbook expounds a bit more than the slides. So the body of the paper, right? So we could break it down into these 6 areas. 1, the abstract. 2, the introduction. 3, the literature review. 4, the methods. 5, the results. And 6, the discussion and conclusion section, right? Now recall, these are like Russian dolls again, right? You have 6 categories, and then within that, there's many, many subcategories. Now the abstract, this is a very valuable thing to write, and it's often recommended, I would recommend, to write the abstract before you start the rest of the paper. Right? So typically the abstract is 150 to 250 words, and journals usually specify how many words it should be for to fit their journal. Right? Now the reason it's so valuable is what it says on the bottom here. It's a great method to focus your message and study, right? So each sentence in the abstract, out of 150 to 250 words, it's 5 or 6 sentences, and you have to boil down the entire study to those 5 or 6 sentences. So it really helps you underline what the central purpose of the study was, what the findings of the study are, and the recommendations from the study, right? Specifically, it's a summary of the research, as in our middle bullet point, where we can present in that short little 150 to 250 words, the research question, the methods, the study design, the results, the data analysis methods, and conclusions and implications. Right? As such, now watch this first sentence. The study employs a cross-sectional design, so there's your study design, and involves a convenient sample, so there's the sample type, of residents living in an apartment complex in a major northeastern city. Right? So that one little sentence, we've said the study design, we've said the sample type, we've said the context of where the residents, the residents who are the study participants live, right? And their recruitment. So second, the next bullet, a multivariate linear regression model indicated that happiness scores were significantly associated with education and income, right? So you'll notice when we describe the data analysis, we're talking about the end, the multivariate analysis, that's used for hypothesis testing, right? The process of the smaller tests leading up to that will be in the manuscript to read, okay? Then the next sentence, the regression model reflected study participants that live with a dog have significantly higher levels of happiness relative to those that live with a cat. So that's the central finding of the study, the independent-dependent variable relationship. Right? So after that, we can move into the introduction. Now, we're going from smaller to bigger. So the abstract is the smallest little encapsulation of the study, right? Now the introduction is probably the smallest part of the body of the paper, right? So it's just going to be a brief, compelling statement regarding why the study topic needs to be researched, right? And it may include prior theoretical, empirical research, as well as current knowledge, right, regarding the study topic with clear citations. So we'll have citations that support our statements regarding why this is an important topic and why it should be researched. For example, if we're talking about sample study 1, we could say something like this. The study of happiness is a well-researched area that has been related to several outcomes. Right? So we're illustrating why it's important, right? Including educational level, income level, and several other factors. So, and we're providing citations, other studies, right? So since we're doing an empirical study, it would be nice to have other empirical studies cited, but it's also, like we said, okay to cite some theoretical studies and so on, right? And then next, right? So these words that lead the sentences, the howevers and therefores, they're very important because they link up our train of thought and our progressive statement about why it's important to do this research, right? So, however, level of happiness has not been examined regarding type of pet ownership, right? So they were showing, the hole in the research, right? The need in the field. Therefore, at the next bullet, therefore, the current study will examine if happiness scores differ at a significant level among participants that live with a cat or a dog, right? So the first bullet says happiness is well researched and it's very impactful. However, it has not been examined in this context. Therefore, our study is going to do that, right? So it's clear and logical. So going on to the literature review, okay? Now, focused and finite, these are the key words, because you'll find when you print out 30, 40, 50 articles, you could start off wanting to write a literature review about, one topic or one relationship between variables, and there's so much literature out there that it draws you in many different directions, and your literature review starts to be unfocused and unwieldy, really. So we want to keep it focused and finite. So we have a plan for that, right? Here's the plan. Consider a 4-point plan. First, discuss the dependent variable and link the covariate variables to it. Second, discuss the independent variable. Then third, discuss the dependent variable and independent variable link. And then fourth, in the last paragraph, we're going to enter the study map information, right? So the actual step 1 study map information, we'll put that to text. So this could look like this. So first, discuss the dependent variable. Now, many dimensions of the dependent variable might be discussed, such as what it is and how it's measured, right? So we might say, happiness is often measured as reports of a specific emotion, right? I mean, happiness might be measured as elevated mood. It might be measured as happiness, as positive mood, right? So it might be called several different things, right? So we might not limit our citations to just studies that call it happiness. If the scales that are used are happiness scales or reflect something we consider like happiness, we might want to mention it. Second, the outcomes linked to the dependent variable, with the exception of no independent variable yet. So we leave that on the back burner, right? So we might say one of the most consistent predictors of happiness is income level. Then we have a citation. Then we might discuss, and it's detailed more in our textbook, but it might discuss, right, the size of the, take one study, for example. So there might be several citations, and of that, one citation is focused upon and elaborated upon, and you might say, Professor so-and-so or Dr. so-and-so conducted a study with this many participants, and it indicated, right, that happiness was predicted by XYZ, right? It's more of like a discussion. Right, then second, and you could even put a subheading, right, if you wanted, saying pet ownership or something of that effect. But second, we discussed the independent variable, right? So what it is and how it's measured. So suppose we called it pet ownership, right? Living with a dog or a cat, maybe that's considered pet ownership. So we say pet ownership has been defined as, and we go on and mention that, and it's probably like defined a few ways. So we could describe that. Then we talk about the outcomes linked to pet ownership, right? But not the dependent variable yet, right? So there have been many studies that have shown that, pet ownership and hugging pets every day leads to elevated mood, right? So things of that ilk might be discussed, right? So, but not the dependent variable, okay? But many outcomes, and what it's been linked to and how it's measured, that'll provide plenty of things to write about there. So third, we're discussing the link between the dependent and independent variable. So we're marrying the two, right? So what we're illustrating here is the need for our study, right? So then we say, so we've already said each of them independently is important, right? Then we say research has not been conducted regarding if happiness occurs on a more or less frequent basis relative to pet type, right? So pet ownership might lead to more happiness, but what about the type of pet? Is it a cat? Is it a dog, right? Then we discuss our link. So the evidence suggests pet owners with pets that demand more care, such as cats, evidenced higher stress levels, right? And higher stress levels, by proxy, we might suggest, lead to less happiness, right? So higher stress levels relative to those who owned more independent animals, such as dogs. And of course, it might not be true that dogs are more independent, but for the sake of our literature review here, if you stated that, you would definitely need a citation because the reverse is commonly thought. So, fourth, we enter the study map in the final paragraph, right? So, we discuss the independent and dependent variable relationship, right? So we say, the current study will examine if people who live with dogs have a significantly higher level of happiness relative to people who live with cats, right? Then we might work in our covariates, right? Covariate dependent variable relationship. And we might also say, also included are several covariates that have been shown to impact happiness. And then we would like to make a statement of significance at the end. So we would say, the analysis represents the first study examining happiness and pet type. So this final paragraph, this is the final paragraph before the methods section. And this is what it's often meant to do, is provide this statement, right? So the last paragraph before the methods is a special paragraph, and this is exactly how it should be structured. Now the methods. The methods often include a lot. And like we said, this is detailed in the textbook, and also there are examples of these statements in the textbook, okay? There's an example of recruitment of study participants, informed consent and IRB approval, right? Data collection, a description of the sample. Sometimes that's in the methods, sometimes that's in the results section, right? Measurement instruments, which we're going to consider here and discuss. The research design, right? And data analysis plan, which we're also going to consider and discuss in this presentation. Now, the point. To understand the statistical analysis, you must understand how each variable is measured in detail, right? That's one of the last things that are examined when people look at results, is how were the variables measured. But that's really important, because if they weren't measured in the proper way, the results of the study, can't be valid, because you're not really measuring the constructs you think you are. Right? So to garner confidence, right, we want to show in detail how everything was measured so people read it and say, yes, that makes sense. Okay, so here, the measurement instruments. Sometimes you'll see a description of measurement instruments, or even one or two, that goes on for a page or two, right? Except in a published manuscript, because there's you're only allowed a certain amount of words, so it has to be short, right? So we need to boil it down to the essentials, right? So if we were to boil it down to the essentials, a measurement instrument, it might look like this. It might include, right, a description, references, and reliability and validity in prior research, if available. Right? So if it's a well-used, widely used, well-documented measure, we would want to state that and then provide maybe the original and subsequent citations illustrating that, right? And if it has reliability and validity values that indicate high reliability and validity, we'd like to state that too, but in a very terse manner. Then we would want to say the number of items on the scale, okay? How each item is scored, for example, Likert scale 1 to 5. The methods used to compute the scale, right? So if it's a composite scale with multiple items, how is it computed, right? Is the mean score taken, or are all the items combined, and is there a cutoff score, and it becomes a dichotomous measurement, right? So the potential range of scores, what's the highest or lowest score a study participant can indicate, and what does a higher score indicate? What does it mean? So, and lastly, the psychometrics, right? So we might want to state for a scale with continuous items, right? The internal consistency value, the Cronbach's alpha, right? And you might want to state past internal consistencies. That would be more like the first bullet, but you would also want to state and specify the internal consistency for your study. So you could say the internal consistency for the current sample, right? So there's no mistaking a prior, citation of internal consistency. Okay. So if we were to take our instrument reflecting happiness, we might say thus: happiness is measured using a 5-item scale created for the current study. Right? The items are measured along a Likert type scale of 1, which equals strongly disagree, to 5, which indicates strongly agree. The scale is computed by taking the mean score of valid responses, right, resulting in a potential range of scores of 1 to 5, with higher scores equaling greater happiness. Finally, our reliability analysis indicated an acceptable level of internal consistency for the current sample, as the Cronbach's alpha equaled 0.89. So you see in just a few sentences, we really describe the very crux of what the instrument is. And then if you wanted to report more about it, such as putting a couple of sample items from the scale in there, you could put it right after that. All right, the methods, right? So, the data analysis plan helps you to follow and interpret the results. Okay, so it's giving us a chronology of how the analysis was done, right? Step by step, walking us through it. And that's not only to help us understand it, but if we have an ideology about how data analysis should be done, we want to see if it was done, how close does it match with our ideology? Would we have done it that way, right? How much does it differ? Do we have confidence in it, right? It's basically showing us the footsteps, so we could say, yeah, I would walk in those footsteps, or, I may have done it differently. All right, the data analysis plan, right? Data analysis is a process. So we're to describe each phase of the quantitative analysis, all right? After that, we're also going to mention checks of data integrity. Now, like I said, checks of data integrity many times aren't reported at all. So when you report them, you'll look very comprehensive and very intelligent, and it'll be the hallmark of a professional level study. So, the data analysis plan in phases, okay? So, data analysis, this is our reporting now. Data analysis will be conducted in 3 phases, right? First, all data will be analyzed descriptively. That's our univariate analysis, right? So that's right in the steps of data analysis, right? Second, the relationship between the dependent variable and predictor variables, the independent and covariate variables, will be examined using bivariate analysis, right? That's what we did. Third, predictor variables associated with the dependent variable at a statistically significant level, right? P is less than 0.05 will be entered into a multiple linear regression model for final analysis, right? So simple and straightforward. Now, here's where we get into our checks of data integrity, right? So prior to data analysis, an examination of test assumptions indicated a satisfactory level of homoscedasticity, linearity, normality, multiple collinearity, right? Checks of outlier scores, undue influence, all that, right? So that's where we're stating that we've done our check of data integrity regarding test assumptions, right? The data are appropriate, regarding test assumptions for analysis, right? Second, a power analysis indicated 85 study participants, equaled sufficient power to detect a medium-sized effect in a multiple linear regression model using 4 predictors, right? Remember, with power set at 0.8 and alpha set at 0.05, right? So there we go. So reporting everything we did. So then we address missing data, right? So in the book, you'll see it's detailed. The data were initially collected from 105 study participants. Of these had 10, remember 10? 10 had missing data values. Now we decided to keep the ones that had at least 80% complete data on the 5-item happiness scale. So 5 were included, and the 5 that only provided 60% and 40% data were excluded, right? So 10 had missing data, 5 were included in analysis, and 5 were excluded from analysis. And here, 5 is kind of a small number, but say if it was like 20 or 30, we could have done that analysis, right? Looking for bias regarding excluded participants due to missing data that we mentioned in the check of data analysis, check of data integrity / missing data, okay? Now, the psychometrics, right? The measurement tools, right? The next bullet. So psychometrics were addressed in measurement instruments. Reliability analysis equaled an acceptable amount of internal consistency for the current sample on our happiness scale. Okay, so there we go. We've covered our bases. Now, as we said earlier, the results are presented in text and tables. The text describes the tables, right? So we're going to consider the text and tables for our univariate descriptive analysis right now. Now, as we said, the book presents all this in greater detail because you could read the entire section in the book and you can't really fit the entire section on the slide, right? But we have our stem here, right, indicating, essentially what's there. So we start off the paragraph as such. Table 1 presents a descriptive analysis, right? These are the stems. Table 1 presents a descriptive analysis of the categorical variables in the current study, right? And then we start describing them. Now, the thing to remember is people don't really like writing, every single little detail about, every number in the tables. And that's fine because the reader essentially doesn't like reading about every little number in the table. So you're presenting more of an overview, not just for univariate, but bivariate, multivariate. We're presenting like a short, concise overview. And for greater detail, people, the readers will read the tables, right? And that's generally preferable. Many people actually only look at the tables, right? So we want to make the text as terse and hard-hitting as possible, right? So for example, we say data indicated about half the sample lived with the dog, while the other half lived with the cat. And then in parentheses, we have the N, the frequency, the number of people for a dog is 47, which is 47% of the sample. And the N for people that live with the cat is 53, which is 53% of the sample. Right, and there we have the tables, right? So, like we said, a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? So that's our picture, right? Now, table 2, the descriptive analysis of the continuous variable in the current study. Now here, we could just make short statements, right? So data indicated the mean level of income was 197,250 with the standard deviation and maybe the minimum and maximum values, right? So it's just one little statement, and that actually could be like a continuous sentence, right? And then we have, of course, the matching table, right? So it's showing us, table 2, descriptive analysis of continuous study variables. It's presenting income level and happiness are continuous variables, the mean of each, the min-max of each, and the potential range of scores for the happiness scale, right, to make the mean meaningful. Okay, now we're getting into our bivariate analysis. And this too, we want to make right to the point, right? So, Table 3 presents an independent samples t-test describing study participants that live with a dog evidence significantly higher mean score, and then we put the mean as standard deviation for that group in there, relative to those that live with the cat. Then we put their mean, the 2.48, and the standard deviation. Then at the end, we put the scientific notation for that statistical test. And this is APA format. So it's T, so it's a t-test. T in the equals, the value of T, 3.76. And then the 98 is the degrees of freedom. Right? Remember that was right in the output. And then the p-value for the test. P is less than 0.001. And that's all you need to put. And then we have our tables. Now the nice thing is you don't need a separate table for every t-test and one-way ANOVA you do. You can combine them, right? Like in table 3, right? We have the t-tests and one-way ANOVAs combined, right? So you can see as you go across the top, you have the independent variable, the n, the mean, and then it says t/f, right? So if you're reporting a t-test, like do you live with a dog or cat, you report the value of t, the 3.76, and degrees of freedom is 98. Then below, if you report our one-way ANOVA, right, you report the value of the f, right, and that's 25.96, and you describe the degrees of freedom as a ratio, right, 2/97. And you see the asterisk there after highest level of education, right? For the one-way ANOVA, if it's statistically significant, you need to report the Bonferroni post hoc analysis. Remember? Saying which mean was significantly higher than the other means, because there's more than 2 means, so that's necessary. All right. Now, correlation, very simple, right? Table 4 presents a bivariate analysis of happiness scores and income level, right? And if there was more continuous variables, we would just, include them in that sentence. And then we also just state the Pearson R correlation analysis revealed a significant positive correlation, right? You put positive in there, between happiness and income. And then we have the R, which is the coefficient, the statistical coefficient for the correlation. R equals 88. The degrees of freedom are 98. And the probability, P, is less than 0.01. Now, as we look at our table, we see, right, there we go. As we look at our table in full view, we see that Table 4 presents the Pearson correlation analysis. Now, notice the numbers up top. They refer to the numbers down the side. So many times, like we don't have many variables here, but many times the correlation table might have 7 or 8 variables, and the titles don't fit going across the top. So it's customary to put the numbers down the side, right? Like income level is 1 and happiness is 2, and then put those numbers correspondingly across the top. See after variable in that line? So where 1 meets 1, where income level meets 1, that's correlated with itself, so there's just dashes. But where 1 meets 2, that's the correlation between income level and happiness, which is 0.88, and is statistically significant, right? And if we had other continuous variables, we would include them in this table. There would be a 3, a 4. Okay, now the big table, the final table, right? Table 5 presents the multiple linear regression analysis examining scores reflecting happiness, right? Data indicated that the overall model was statistically significant. And why do we say that first? Because if the model is not significant, nothing else matters, right? Nothing else is believable or credible, right? So we say that first. Then we have another overall value, the R squared. So we say, furthermore, the model explained over 80%, we put the R squared and adjusted R squared, right? 80% of the variance in the dependent variable happiness, right? And then, right, just like we examined in the output, right? We're reporting it in that order. In terms of the individual predictors, study participants living with a dog evidenced significantly higher happiness scores relative to those living with a cat. And we have here the standardized beta, right? B equals negative 0.23. The standard error, right? The standardized beta, and the probability level, P is less than 0.01. Right, and there we go. There's our linear regression analysis. So you can see that most of it looks like the coefficients table from the output, and the bottom part where it says note reports the value for the R squared, adjusted R squared, right? And then the full value of the model, right? The F, the degrees of freedom, and the probability level. And you can see under education, we've actually entered the reference group. So high school reference group, right? So we couldn't see that in the output, which might have been a little awkward, but we do see it when we report our results here. All right, our discussion. Now, our discussion. Here's where we evaluate and interpret the findings of the study, right? So we're discussing, right? So it's not hard to understand. We're going to begin with the statement of support or non-support for the study hypothesis. Then we'll discuss, right, if the implications are supported, why was that so? What does that mean for the field, for study participants, for the study population, right? If the hypothesis was not supported, why is that? What could have been, reasons that it was not supported? Right? And we have a limitation section which also describes, how the study was limited. And all studies are limited, usually in several ways. So it's okay to have limitations, but usually it's not, blown out of proportion, where it casts dispersions on the findings. Because we always want to say the findings have a certain level of value, and here's the level of value, right? And here are the limitations, and we're considering both, right? But we don't want to make the limitations sound like they overshadow the value, right? We want to present it objectively, right, and say the value and the limits. Okay, so the discussion for sample study 1, we might say the study findings supported the study hypothesis that postulated that study participants that live with dogs have a significantly higher level of happiness relative to those that live with cats. There are several possibilities for this finding, right? And there's where, we might discuss the stress of raising cats, or, the lack of stress raising dogs, or whatever might be the case, right? And of course, what that would hold true. It could be an intervention, right? Why did the intervention work? Why didn't the intervention work? What are possible reasons, right? Then we want to talk about limitations, right? So the current study also incorporates several limitations, right? So for example, the design did not allow for participants that lived with both a dog or a cat, right? Or neither a dog or a cat, or the type of dog or the type of cat, right? So that those are directions for future research. So that's one of the things about limitations. It's not meant simply to cast aspersions. It's also meant to suggest future research, as in we didn't have a chance to do X, Y, Z, but a future study might benefit from doing that. Okay, so the conclusion needs to be reasonable and a reasonable and accurate statement based upon the implications of the findings, right? So we don't want to go too far, right? So more conservative is better usually, right? So it's a statement of what the findings infer, but don't go beyond those boundaries, right? So our manuscript concludes future research should be conducted, right? However, we do not recommend everyone who owns a cat should trade their pet in for a dog in order to increase their level of happiness. So here's what we might say. The finding that pet owners that live with the dog evidence a significantly higher degree of happiness relative to those that live with the cat suggests that future research should examine this topic further, right? Now here's a big recommendation when you're getting to the end of a quantitative study. Specifically, future research might benefit from incorporating a qualitative piece that includes probing qualitative questions examining the finding. So qualitative means we found these findings, and qualitative means we'll ask a question right to the sample or the study population saying, why might this finding be true? And they can describe in their own words why it may or may not be true. And that's perhaps the best source to ask, right? So future research is great, and future research that has a quantitative and a qualitative piece might even be more enhanced. So here's an important point, and this is true of fiction writing too. One of the best ways to develop skills, right, in the write-up and report, step 7, is to read published articles, right? View how other authors report findings and write their discussion and conclusion sections. So there's no need to invent the wheel. You can listen to the voice of other authors, see what you find valuable, right? You see how you like what was done, right? And develop your own style from that, right? Alrighty, the next class, we are going to create a PowerPoint presentation that will effectively present your qualitative study results. Right? We're going to detail the most crucial information to extract from the quantitative analysis to present. Okay, we're going to offer the opportunity to present the results in class, like at a group or individual level, which is a very valuable experience, trust me. All right, so thank you for watching, and I will see you next class.